Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. Today we are going to be talking to Charlotte Cheng about her new book, The Night Market Rescue. And it is set in the night markets in Taipei. So we are going to be talking to her about those childhood memories that she has of those night markets and why she decided to turn it into a children's book, and just about the process of writing and illustrating and what it's like to do one versus the other. Hello there. So we will get her on here for you now. Find out all about it. There. Again, that's Night Market Rescue. While she's getting on here, I can show you some of the interior pictures of this adorable dog and this bustling night market. Hello, welcome.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so excited to be here, everyone. It's my first Instagram interview, so bear with me.
Well, we are excited that you chose us to be your first one. And why don't we just go ahead and jump right in and tell us what was your journey into becoming an author? Is that something you always wanted to do?
Uh, well, I've always loved picture books. So even when I was in high school or college, whenever we wandered into a bookstore, you would find me in the children's book section, and people were going, Charlotte, what are you doing here? And it just always fascinated me, this beautiful marriage of images and words. And then I actually got really sick in my 20s, and I couldn't do anything. I had to quit my full-time job and everything like that. And when I was super like sick, the only thing I wanted to do was write.
Hmm.
And I wrote my first children's book story when I was really sick. And what happened was I wanted to learn the whole process, and I started attending conferences, and I decided I found my people. Like, the people in this children's book community they're so welcoming, they're so warm, they're so excited to share their stories. And so that became a over 10-year journey of me writing stories and submitting over and over again. Night Market Rescue started over 10 years ago, and I kept submitting and submitting until finally I sold it and it's now a reality, and I cannot believe I get to hold it in my hands.
I bet, and we should say it just came out a few days ago. So if you
Yes.
want to and get your copy, you now can. And I just want to go back to what you were talking about, how you started writing when you were really sick, because something that we've talked about in previous interviews on this channel is how writing can be so therapeutic and such a healing. I mean, not even specifically about like an illness, but just if you're going through a difficult time in your life for whatever reasons. So I love that it was definitely true in your story, that was really when you started focusing on writing.
Yes. And I have actually a couple books coming out over the years, and every single one is tied to a personal
Mm.
story or feeling that just pushed me or compelled me to write something to share that story with people. So yes, I definitely see it as a therapeutic process, and also a way to just share my perspective and stories with other people who might be feeling the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Which also goes back to the idea of how we need more diverse stories in so many senses of the word, because like you said, kids need to see their stories and their experiences reflected in the books that they're reading. And I'm also curious because I know that you've illustrated other books and you've written your own books but had other people illustrate them. So why did you decide not to illustrate your own? And how are those processes different for you of writing a book versus illustrating someone else's story?
That's such a great question. And I really appreciated that you sent me that question in advance, because I really wanted to take some time to think about it, because sometimes I wonder about it myself. So I actually, I'm a self-taught illustrator. I've drawn also all my life. And when I started going to conferences, people were saying it's easier to break into the industry as an illustrator than
Mm.
as an author in many ways, because almost everyone on the street, if asked, they think they can write a children's book. Which is not the case. It's a very, very hard thing to do, to get it published, to sell, to make it work. But it's a smaller field to try and illustrate a book. And so I built out my portfolio. I started illustrating other people's stories. And that's when I started going, wait a second, I also want to write my stories. And as I started writing them, I realized, wait a second, the stories I'm writing don't necessarily match my art style. My art style is more simple, it's more cartoony, versus Night Market Rescue is a very immersive story. It's action packed, it's almost like scenes from a movie. And I knew I probably couldn't do it justice, but another illustrator could. And it's actually every single book that's coming out over the next few years is a different illustrator. And I've loved collaborating with artists and seeing other people's like work transform my story as well. One day I think I will want to do one where I can write an illustrator, but I'm looking to find the right match, a story that will match my art style. I have one in the works, but we'll see. I'm still iterating on it.
That's so interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
love that you were so thoughtful, and I imagine it takes a certain degree of humility too to say, you know what, I'm not the right illustrator for this story. That you can, but it's kind of cool that you know your own style so well that you know, okay, this is not the right match for this story, and found another illustrator. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Did it make it easier for you to work with the illustrators because you had gone through that process that yourself, you had been an illustrator? Or I don't know, because I know sometimes depending on whether you're doing independent versus traditional, you might not even have much interaction with them.
Right. Right. And in this case for Night Market, it's a traditional publication. So I actually didn't get to talk to Amber that much. So she would submit the artwork to the publishing team. They would share their comments with me and have me add comments as well. But it felt like a conversation because I could add comments. I even would add comments like, "Oh my gosh, I love this spread," or "You perfectly captured this." And I knew on the other side she was seeing that too. And then you would see the next round, you could see how some of our feedback was incorporated into our work. So it really felt collaborative. And now that the project's done, she and I are like messaging each other all the time. She has a cat, I have a dog, so we share that too. But the other piece of it, me illustrating past books, is in the writing process. It really helps me too. Because again, I say it's a marriage of words and images. And what that means is that the words on the page should add to the illustrations on the page. It shouldn't be repeating what's on the page. And me being an illustrator, I understand that. So when I'm writing, I'm adding sounds, textures, tastes, things that the illustrator can't do. And I also know when to remove my words because I know and I trust that the illustrator can illustrate that and show it through imagery. And so that dance, that artful dance, is something that I was very lucky to have exposure to when I was illustrating too, where sometimes I was talking to the authors like, "Hey, can we remove these a few sentences so I have more space?" And trust me, I'll be able to show these two sentences in the imagery, so you don't need it in the space. And so it was a conversation to be had, and it really informed how I then move forward writing my own manuscripts as well.
I can see that. You know, that's something I hadn't thought about. I thought about how the illustrator would be reacting to the text. I hadn't thought as much about how the text might be reacting with the illustrations. Like you said, kind of like a back and forth kind of a dance. And speaking of the dog, which if you anybody who's read the book, the dog is the main character in the book, and I see a beautiful painting behind you. Is that your dog?
Yes, that's my dog Waldo. And the origin story, I can go on, but so like I said, it was an over 10-year journey to write this book, right? And it started off just a mother and daughter story exploring a Taiwanese night market. And agents loved the writing, but they were like, "Oh, it's a little too quiet." And I was really struggling with it until we were looking to rescue a dog. And my family's from Taiwan, and we looked online and found out there were a lot of street dogs in Taiwan looking for a home. They need more space, they need more places to run. And so when we started delving into the story, I found out some street dogs use night markets to survive. They survive off of the scraps that people give them. And I remember seeing some of those dogs. In fact, someone just shared that a family adopted a street dog in the Taiwanese night market because the dog kept following them. So there's actually these stories, and I went, "Oh my gosh, how exciting would it be to see the night market through the perspective of a street dog?" And so then the next time we made a trip to Taiwan for my family, I started taking photos of night markets from down below as if a dog was seeing the night market. And I'd use that as reference when I was writing the story. And then again, I was able to share those photos with Amber. Like I shared it with the publisher, they handed off to Amber, and Amber was able to use those photos to really help capture the perspective of a street dog. when he's exploring a night market.
I love it because it's such a unique perspective. Like you said, you easily could have done it with the mother and the daughter. And then it also adds that whole element of him, you know, searching for a home and finding this friend. And then what's going to happen? Does she just leave him at the end? And of course, well, I don't know if it's not much of a spoiler because it's a picture book, but you know, they end up adopting him. It's such a sweet story. And but also to go to the back to the original idea, what made you decide to write about the night markets in the first place? Because I've heard you say that this is something really special in Taiwan that that they're really famous for, and you had a lot of really fond childhood memories of it.
Right. And I recommend anyone who's interested in writing children's books to try and join your local SCBWI, Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It was at one of those many conferences and events where someone was saying, find your own unique voice, your own perspective that no one else can share. And start there when you're trying to figure out what story to write. And that really made me pause, because before then I was writing these really more generic stories about a random girl who wants to swim, right? A random, you know, and I went, wait a second, how do I fold my own unique perspective? And it made me think all the way back to my heritage. And it made me think, what was my fondest memory as a child in Taiwan? And it was exploring these night markets and realizing when I was telling people here, I grew up in the US, I was born here. When I told people about these Taiwanese night markets, they're like, what is this thing? I've never heard of it. And I would share photos, I would share the snacks and things I'd have. And every time they were just so interested in it. And I said, this might be a really great way to highlight my unique voice and perspective through the eyes of a child, so it's approachable for a kid, but also it's a really great way to expose kids to a new culture, to a new place that they could visit perhaps one day.
Yeah, and you know what's really neat about it too is, like you said, this is a unique story and exposes kids to things that they might, kids from the US that they might not have seen before, and yet there are elements they can relate to. Like I was just rereading it with my daughter before we got on here, and she saw somebody drinking boba tea. Well, that's something a lot of kids, I mean, if we had said this 20 years ago, maybe not, but now that's something really popular. Or they're the kids blowing bubbles, you know, so it's like there are elements that they can relate to that can kind of hook them into the story. And of course the dogs are just being out with your family and finding new foods and things. And yet it's also exposing them to so much more. So it was kind of a neat balance between those two factors, you know?
Yeah, I'm so glad you caught that. That's something I intentionally do with most of the stories I write these days, is to have parallels, right? Mm-hmm. So like I have the uniqueness and the specificity of the night market there, but I want to pair it with a storyline and characters that kids can identify with. And kids love dogs. I love dogs. In fact, we now have 2 street dogs from Taiwan. Like we've adopted 2 of them. And so knowing how much kids love dogs, going, like, you can connect to that regardless if you've been to a night market or not. And the details I'm highlighting in the night market are things that I'm thinking the kids would love, like that boba, like this sausage, because Taiwanese sausage, hands down, best sausage in the world. And then also like the bubbles, right? So things that kids can connect to and really say, wait, I do that, but this is in a different setting. And so there's that beautiful marriage of like unique perspective but common like themes, right? And so that's that, again, another type of dance that you develop while you're writing picture books.
It's beautiful. And you know, I have to say, as someone who's not an author, I mean, I do a lot of book reviews, but I think before I got started doing these interviews, I don't know if most of us are aware of how thoughtful authors are and illustrators when they do, you know, you just read the book as a reader and you think, oh, this is such a fun book, and there's so much happening that you don't even really realize is happening in the story that's affecting you as a reader, but kind of in the background. So I love that you're so deliberate and thoughtful about all of these elements, and the balance between them is really, it's amazing.
Oh,
but I do want to, because we are kind of getting partway through our time, I wanted to jump back a little bit and talk about just like the business of getting a book published. You talked about how this took 10 years. And people might not realize, especially if you're doing traditional publishing, how long it can take. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I know you've published independently as well. You have those really cute books. I think they're bilingual books about a red panda. That caught my daughter's eye too, because I think everybody's into red pandas now because of the movie. But so you had published those independently. What made you decide to do one more traditionally, and how was that experience? Like, how did the experiences compare?
Oh yeah, I could go on and on about this. I'll try and give you like the short version. So for the bilingual books, they're called Bobo Loves Dumplings, and we then have a second one that was Bobo's Colorful Chinese New Year. And those are Mandarin bilingual books. And we knew that this is a very special niche audience that we're developing these books for. And so a traditional publishing house probably wouldn't be as interested because usually they're trying to appeal to a much wider spans. So because of that, my partner and I definitely realized, okay, this is probably needs a self-publishing route. And we planned it out. We looked at the expenses. I had some connections to publishing through my full-time work as a curriculum developer, and I had printed and managed printing projects with Chinese publishers and print houses. So I sort of had that background in me that I knew how to get those files to them, how to manage that whole thing. And then we hired an illustrator. So I basically was the art director hat in this sense. And I co-wrote it with her, and we hired an illustrator from Hawaii. So we've never met in person, but she did the illustration work, and we really, it was a true collaborative effort, and it took years. Like both my partner and I work full time. So we had to chip away at it like an hour a week over time. And actually our first one came out during the pandemic. Like it actually just happened to happen that way. So that was like 2-3 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so long. But the traditional publishing, the long leg of it is first getting a publisher interested in your manuscript. They see thousands and thousands of submissions a day. And so, like I said, it took me 10 years to find a publisher who was interested, who wanted to invest in the book. And from the day you sign the contract, we were looking for illustrators. Then once they sign on, they need like a year, sometimes a year to finish the illustrations. Then from there, they have to send the design files, do the layout to the printers, often in China, who will then develop the book. They have to print the books and then ship it all the way back. So I signed my contract for Night Market Rescue all the way back in 2021, and now it's 2023. So even when it's a traditional publishing house who's got that full team, all that experience, it can still take up to like that long. So really, when you're trying to decide if you want to submit to traditional publishers or self-publish, pause and think about why you want the story out in the world. If you want the story out for a specific community and you know it's a small community, but I know it, self-publishing is probably a great route. You will need to really do a lot of legwork when it comes to marketing and discoverability. If it's a story you think could be universally appealing, you're ready for that thick skin to get possibly many rejections, go for the traditional route, try it out and see, are there people interested in it? Because if they buy your book, they give you an advance, which is great, but they also have this huge team of marketing, discoverability people who know what to do and how to get that book out there. So that's the trade-off there. Like you might have to take a long time to get a book sold, but when you do, you get that whole full team of support. So I hope that helps highlight the differences. For every book, there's a very personal path. So it's up to you to figure out what that path could be.
And do you feel like, because I know you have, I think, 2 books coming out next year, is that right? Do you feel like that once because you said like a lot of times what takes the longest time is getting a publisher interested in you. So once you get that initial interest, do you feel like it's easier to get your later books published? I mean, like you said, it's going to be that long process of the actual work on the book and publication. But as far as getting them interested in you, like now you're kind of a known quantity. Does that make it easier?
It does. It was, this is a really fun story if there's time to cover this. But so we actually submitted 2 stories out at the same time with my agent. So Night Market Rescue and another one called A Name for Sister that's coming out through HarperCollins next year. And A Name for Sister actually went up for auction between 2 publishing houses. And I ended up like negotiating having A Name for Sister at HarperCollins. But Lori at Rocky Pond was just like, I want more of your stories. And so when she signed for Night Market Rescue, it was baked in that there was another book that she also wanted to acquire, like whatever my next book was, and we'd collaborate on it together. And funnily enough, I wrote 2 stories very quickly, oddly, when my family had COVID. I get through these, it's so funny, when I hit these tough times, writing gets me through it, and often my best work comes from there. And so I wrote two stories, Roar Chew and I Miss You Most, and I wasn't sure which one she'd like. So I worked with my agent. We sent both of the stories to her, and she's like, done, I want both. And so all of a sudden, it's 3 books, right? And then since then, we've worked on another book together. So once you get like an editor who loves working with you, and she and I love it. She makes me a better writer. And we're like, it's a collaborative process. We go back and forth on editing. Like, you want to keep doing it again, right? And so you sort of become a team, and it is a lot easier to get your next book out. And because that's another benefit of having other illustrators do work on my stories, is that it leaves me more time to write the next story, to work on the next book. And so because I was able to sell so many in a short time frame, that means I actually have 3 books coming out next year. They just moved up another one, and then 2 books coming out the following year. So you're able to pick up that pace because you have multiple illustrators working on your different stories. So that's what happened. It was a over 10-year overnight success, where I then sold 6 books over the span of 1 year. So it went from like nothing to poosh, like all of these books out, you know. So it can happen. Like, just keep persisting. And if you have a story like, I don't know, I don't want to work on it in it anymore, file it away, because who knows what the story will be that catches an editor's eye. But oftentimes when an editor likes one of your stories, there's a high chance that they might like your other ones too.
That is a great tip. And especially, I think that's such a great story to let people know that even though they're getting a lot of rejections and it seems like nothing's happening, once it starts, it really takes off. So that's really good motivation, I think, or encouragement for people. And can you tell us what were the names of the books that are coming out next year, and then 2025?
Yeah, sure. So the next one is coming spring next year. It's Roar Chew, which is basically a dragon who has a cold, and Phoenix, who's Dragon's friend, is trying to get the dragon to slow down, and Dragon's not having it. And that is going to be illustrated by the award-winning Caldecott medalist Dan Santat. That was a true treat to work with him. And then the next one is going to be A Name for Sister, coming out through HarperCollins, illustrated by the New York Times bestseller Sophie Diao. Her illustrations are absolutely gorgeous as well. And the third one is going to be I Miss You Most, which is a story near and dear to my heart, about my grandfather, who I lost during the pandemic. And it's just about how much I miss him and how much I see him still every day when I'm doing things. I'm tearing up just talking about it. And that is illustrated by the beautiful illustrator Cindy Yan. Like, took my breath away with her artwork. So I cannot wait for the world to see how she transformed my relationship with my grandpa into these images. And she also lost her grandfather too around the same year. So this story is a combination of our 2 grandfathers and our love for both of them. So those are the 3 books. The following year, funnily enough, I have another book out about my other grandfather, who started a popsicle business in Taiwan. And so there's that one coming out, and then another one that's secret. So I can't share it yet, but keep an eye out for that one.
I love it. Like a little bit of suspense there. That's perfect. It sounds so beautiful. I can't wait. So anybody, if you haven't picked up this one, you really need to. And I can't wait for your other ones, because this one is such a beautiful book, and the text and illustrations, and it's such a sweet story. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I'm sure you're busy now with the book launch and everything. So we appreciate getting to talk with you and sharing your experiences. And if anybody joined us late, this will be up in a few minutes on Instagram, and I'll have it up on YouTube in the next day or so. So thank you so much.
Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and for walking me through my first Instagram interviews.
You did great.
We did it.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.